Welcome to The Courage Effect. I'm Suzanne Weller, and this is a show about growth and unleashing what's possible. You will hear inspiring stories about what courage looks like, how we navigate what's getting in our way, and the opportunities that surface when we choose courage over comfort. Let's get started. Welcome to The Courage Effect. The conversation that we're going to be having on today's show is really about getting out of your comfort zone and the courage that it can take to do that. This is a conversation with George Brewster, and he's talking about moving his family to Spain, something that he and his partner had wanted to do, but just the challenges of making it happen, the fears, and getting beyond those fears, and having a pretty fantastic experience, but also challenging, and not just for him and for his partner, but also for his kids, and seeing what they received from it. What were the gifts they got on the other side? It's a fun conversation, and I invited George to be in the show because I think a lot of us, we wait for these opportunities to come to us. We wait for an opportunity to maybe relocate, or, there might be some serendipity involved or happenstance. That can be a beautiful thing. But what would it be like if there is something that you've been wanting to do, like relocating or like taking, some bigger step in your life or in your professional journey? What is holding you back from doing it? George and I talk about this, the fears, learning from other people, getting some perspective on what other people have done, the idea of, what is the worst thing that can possibly happen as a result of it, but also what is the best thing. And staying curious as we open ourselves up to new experiences, new people, new dynamics overall. So this show is about having new experiences and seeking them out for ourselves and our family. I hope that you enjoy this conversation with George, and let me tell you a little bit about him. George Brewster is a coach, and he has a firm called Gimbal Systems. He spent most of his early career in business and business sales in the financial services and technology industries. His passion for team dynamics and his desire to support individuals and businesses led him to get his master's degree in applied behavioral science and organizational development. And he spent the last 15 years with teams and leaders to help them thrive together, achieve the results that they want, and navigate successfully in uncertain times. He's also a very kind human being and a lot of fun, and I hope that you enjoyed this conversation with George. Thank you for listening. George, we met last summer, and one of the things that I loved about our conversation was you came from this place of real courage in your life with the work that you do, and also with moving your family to Spain. And I'd love to talk to you about your background, who you are, your story, and maybe what led you to your Spanish adventure.
I'm an East Coast transplant that moved west. 25 years ago now. And professionally, I've done a variety of different things trying to, in the first part, figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up and the type of work I wanted to do. And that led me into this space of coaching, executive coaching, leadership development, and teams that I've been doing now for 15 years and feel so fortunate to do that. And really how I ended up in that was, I always like to say I spent my early life playing competitive sports, team sports, and I've always been intrigued with what makes for good teams and winning teams, losing teams, etc. And that followed me into my professional life with small companies and a variety of roles. And I found my way into a graduate degree program by way of doing some personal development work that taught me applied behavioral science. And my sporting days were really about setting people up to score goals. So as an assist person. And so that's how I hold my coaching practices, that I try and support people to score the goals they want to score in their life, personally and professionally. And so, I've been doing that for about 10 years and suddenly realizing that, a lot of the work I do is help people take courageous acts, make changes in their life, or have a hard conversation or a risky conversation, et cetera, et cetera. And I was suddenly realizing that after 10 years of doing that, I was sort of like, boy, I haven't done much of a big change in my life in a while, after lots of job changes along the way and career reinventions. And it suddenly became apparent to me that, geez, what right do I have to be coaching these people if I'm sort of constantly comfortable and haven't done much change? And all the way along, my amazing partner Melissa had sort of been talking about this concept of us going somewhere abroad with our kids. And candidly, it terrified me. The thought the thought of doing that, uplifting our life and going somewhere different, perhaps risking our financial well-being. And funnily enough, the same coffee shop where you and I met, I was meeting someone there for a networking conversation, and they were interested in talking to me about what I did because they were thinking about launching their own individual company. And we started getting into talking, and part of the reason he was launching his practice is that he had just returned from living abroad with his family for a year. And the serendipity of that, suddenly the conversation very much pivoted to me talking about what I did and him learning from me, to me asking him about what he had done and learning from him. And he became very adept and coach-like and said, what's your biggest fear about this? And I said, well, candidly, it's terrifying financially to think about just up and leaving after having built my practice and sort of getting going, to think about, doing something like that. And he said, okay, well, I get that. And so here's your assignment. Go interview 3 real estate agents to find out what you can rent your house for. And you might change your whole perspective after that. So I took his advice and I did that. And sure enough, suddenly there was a possibility there. And I remember talking to my wife after that and saying, hey, I think we should move abroad. And she was like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, I think we should. And I think we need to do it right now. In fact, I think we're behind. I think we should have done it about a year or two. And so we need to go right now. And she was like, wait a minute, what? You're kidding me. No way. And there started the adventure of preparing ourselves to move abroad to Spain.
I love the symbiotic nature of that conversation, that you were there to actually give advice and perspective to somebody, and it ended up being such a nice mutual exchange, and that really pushed you to the other side. And the fact that he actually gave you sort of an assignment, I love that.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And I was just thinking about Jason Wilbur, so I don't know if you would ever hear this, but just a huge shout out to him, because he was there in that moment and gave the assignment, and then also continued to sort of champion and support and encourage and teach, because the process of getting visas and the whole thing is it's not a particularly easy process. And he was just a wonderful support throughout the journey.
That's great. It's also, I think, so important to do it with eyes wide open, because I mean, I was just having dinner with some dear friends last night, and one of my friends said, I'd love to move to Germany. Like, maybe I can make that happen. And it was like, well, what does that take? Like, I have friends that are moving to Portugal and moving to all these countries, yes, and it's amazing, but it's not like you just go and everything is done. So it's nice to have, to your point, like, to get over some of the fears of what's holding you back, but also having a realistic idea of what is the roadmap to actually make this happen.
Yes, for sure. The bureaucracy of the process was daunting at times. And you're absolutely right. The logistical piece of the puzzle is really complicated, and was a big part of the journey, honestly. It was one thing when we finally got ourselves there, but it was actually the build up to it and all the hurdles we had to get over. That was the adventure really started 9 months before we left the country, candidly, and the learning. Yeah, sure.
And how old were your kids when you did this?
So they were 13 and 11 at the time. So we have, our oldest was 13, and then we have boy-girl twins that were 11. And so, the neat thing that we're talking about this right now is timely. The twins are seniors, and they're writing their college applications. And, we've been giving them lots of space to do that on their own, but we finally got the chance to have them read their essays to us. And both their essays spoke to some of the experience they had in Spain early on, and those hard days at school. And I often think about those days we took them to their first day of school, each of them, and thinking about the courage it took for them to walk in the door, not knowing anyone, not speaking the language. And in some ways, as I've joked around with them, like, every day thereafter is an easier day, and they have the experience of having done that and survived it. And so it just was really neat to hear their reflections on it now 6 years later, of what they learned from that courageous act and what they had to overcome to sort of get outside their comfort zone and make friends and try and reach across the cultural gap and language gap.
It's beautiful because that's really scary. If
Yeah.
I was 13, I mean, especially 11 scary too, but as a teenager, that to me, just the idea of moving, period, much less going to another country.
Yes, for sure. And we went for a year and then extended for a second because we were having such a great time. And I think even that was hard for them to recognize that we were extending our stay. They weren't particularly pleased with that either.
Eek.
So
And I'm curious, what did you learn from the experience?
well, for me, there was so much learning, Suzanne. It was incredibly humbling to try and be an adult learning a second language.
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty adept at hearing and translating, but when it came to speaking, that was just I could feel the gears burning, and the smoke coming out of my head as I tried. And the good news is that Melissa could speak much better. So I could interpret, she could speak. We were great together. When we went out apart, it was pretty embarrassing. And eventually the kids just refused to let us even speak. So that was one learning. Two was just, facing the fear of going out in the world as a stranger, as a non-native speaker. We were in a very small village, very Spanish, and not fitting in and having that feeling of, to a degree, not belonging, being different was hugely informative of just what that is like as a white male in America. I don't face that too much here at home, and so I think that was one. And then the other learning that I had was culturally just how different the way of life was there, the prioritization of family, the less emphasis on work, and there was just more downtime. There was more time to be with myself, my thoughts, and because I wasn't working a ton in the first year, the second year I was. And so in that open space, there's huge learning too of what to do in the absence of being busy and going and going and going. So a big part of the learning was, what to do with more time and space and how to think about slowing down. And I think the last thing I would add was it gave me a much greater, as I was saying earlier, in coaching, we're often encouraging people to take leaps of faith or take risks. So I think it just reconnected me to how hard it is to have courage, to make a change and to sustain a change and to not want to back away from the change and ride out the emotional journey of change. And so I feel like I have a greater sense of empathy again of how hard it is to have the courage to affect change in your life.
Definitely. You talk about extending for a year, but I'm sure there were a few months initially that were pretty rocky. Did you ever think about coming back?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, there were definitely moments that were really hard and where we were second guessing what we had done to ourselves and especially to our kids as they really struggled. And I still remember sort of huddled in our very small, tight space together, and they would come home from school every day. And Melissa and I would sort of brace ourselves for like, what are they going to bring home today, and how are we going to kind of handle it and support them, and then how are we going to figure out how to help them with their homework and all of that. So I do remember those first few months, especially because we were in southern Spain and it was glorious when we got there in August, and September were spectacular, and we're sort of living the dream on the Mediterranean. And then winter rolls in and you're in sort of a cold, dark Spanish village, and you're dealing with cultural change and you can't figure out how to do it. And they do math completely differently over there. And suddenly the overwhelm and second guessing of like, oh my God, what have we done to ourselves? And what have we gotten ourselves into? And in those moments, it was hard, but we just said, hey, we've we signed a 1-year commitment to this. Let's see if we can make it through today and get to tomorrow, and look for what's possible versus let's pull the plug and go home where it's safe and secure.
I love that. Look for what's possible.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's also interesting too, because you're all at different points along that line of some people liking it more than others and being in different spaces and negotiating between those different mindsets and emotions.
Yeah. I think that was definitely, we would definitely have check-ins, sort of, we call it best part of the day, B pods, best part of the day, hardest part of the day and funniest part of the day, as a way to sort of try and check in with where we were all at. To your point, each of us is having our own individual experience of it, and yet we're also having the collective experience of the change. And, in some ways, I definitely think the kids had it harder. Melissa and I were sort of a bit on sabbatical. We had some open space. We got to explore. We were taking Spanish lessons while they were in school, but that was with fellow expats. And, in some ways, I just give the kids a huge amount of credit because they were going into it every day. We were supporting them and learning ourselves too, but clearly they had a tough road. And so those afternoons when they would come home was just a little bit of just like, where are they, in what state are they going to be? And, are they going to be okay? And how much do they hate us today for doing this to them? Candidly, right? Like, but then there are these moments where they started to get it, they started to piece it together. And then that was the other learning, back to learning. Boy, the young mind and how adaptable and flexible kids are and resilient and what they were able to do was just sort of mind-blowing, to how quickly they ramped up and accelerated. And, candidly kind of left us in the dust.
It sounds like you learned a lot from your kids.
Yes, for sure. We totally did.
All right. We need to pause for a quick break. So stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back. Each episode of The Courage Effect offers you a chance to meet inspiring guests, hear their stories, and spread what we call courageous contagion. The podcast's mission is to amplify courage in your lives, workplaces, and communities. So how can you be a conduit for courage and support this podcast? The best no-cost way is simple. Subscribe or follow The Courage Effect and leave a comment or a review. You taking the time to do this helps us get the word out, to reach more people and amplify what's important to you. It also ensures that you won't miss any future episodes. I'm so honored that you're a part of this community, and I'm glad you're here. Now back to the show. Welcome back. Let's pick up the conversation with George Brewster. I'm curious, how did this impact your business?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So we went over in 18, summer of 18, so that into 19. What it impacted my business was, I got to do some certification things that I had been wanting to do, certified in the Leadership Circle profile, which I think you're also familiar with, the Enneagram. I did some certifications while over there, which was really great because I got to meet all kinds of amazing fellow practitioners that were in Europe, and build my network in that regard. And then also started to get some work assigned in the middle part of that first year and second year. I also did a coaching certification while I was there. So I was doing a lot of learning and growing professionally while I was there, in addition to culturally and language wise. And then was able to start generating some work and convincing people to doing virtual work, this concept of virtual work, which if we, go back in time, pre-COVID was still kind of a bit edgy in terms of the coaching facilitation space, and started to do some, leveraging Zoom and doing remote work. And my wife included, she's a therapist, so she was doing a little bit of therapy work by way of telehealth, et cetera. And what was fascinating is then obviously COVID came along, and that was hugely impactful to the world. But what what was beneficial to us, both of us as practitioners, is that we had already sort of ramped up to the virtual space, and we're really ready for that. We came back in June of 2020. COVID had made virtual work that much more accessible. And so suddenly my work just took off. In some ways, my practice blossomed by way of the time off. And I think my coaching got better because I'd built up these additional skill sets while I was there.
That's great.
And then I think the last thing I would say is culturally coming back to America, as hard as it was that we were all living through COVID, in some ways, I think we benefited from that, in that the Spanish lifestyle, especially Southern Mediterranean lifestyle, was much slower paced. And we came back into America when everyone was still sort of in COVID and slowed down. I don't know if our transition would have been as smooth if we had come back to full throttle American living. We were able to kind of ease our way back in as we all came out of COVID.
That's really interesting because that's one of the questions I was going to ask you, or what were the challenges of reentry and the timing of that? It sounds like maybe instead of being exacerbated by the pandemic, it might have actually made it a little smoother, as you said.
I think so. I mean, hard to say, but I do think we were able to kind of ease our way back into that American lifestyle, especially with young kids, where there's just so much going on. Because America was just much more freed up. Our experience in Spain was we were locked down for 6 weeks. We weren't allowed to leave our apartment. I mean, there's some hilarious stories in that time period of what we experienced in that time together in a basically 1,000 square foot apartment, the five of us.
Wow.
And a puppy, not allowed to go out. And so to come back to our larger house in Ballard and be able to move about and walk around, it felt pretty liberating.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you talked about the fears of actually before this happened, what were your biggest fears?
About leaving? You mean before going to Spain?
About leaving, yeah, about actually taking the plunge.
Yeah, I think, well, one was just a professional hit. I was really uncertain of like what would happen as an entrepreneur, sort of solo entrepreneur, to would I have to start all over again just when my business was sort of up and going. So that was one, the financial instability or risk to say I'm going to hit the pause button for a while. And can I just come back and hit play again? Or am I going to basically go to the start of the movie all over again when I didn't really want to? I think two was, impact on our kids. What would it be like for them to leave and then come back? And similar type thing, reintegration to their schooling, connection with their friends and our broader community, right? There's always a sense of like, will we be forgotten? Will life go on without us, etc. So I think that was another one of the fears. And then there's just something when you get outside the American bubble, if you will, of what's it like to come back, having been away. And, similar to like when I go back home to the East Coast, it's still where I'm from, but I don't live there anymore. And so it's just this different perspective on things. And so I was just kind of curious, like, what is that going to be like to come back with a different perspective? And Melissa and I were super excited about the cultural experience for the kids. And we were also pretty nervous, like, because it was a big leap that not many other people were doing. And so I think there's a little bit of that, like, yikes, are we the crazy ones here? Because no one else is doing this. And what if it all blows up? Then we're going to really look stupid, right? So I think that was probably in the room, if you will, or in our thoughts.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Oh, and there is that trailblazing mentality of it, especially when other people aren't doing it, or I don't see a lot of people doing it with families.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's partly why I was excited to share it with you and talk about it, because I do think it is really courageous, especially with kids. And what I can say today is that we all grew so much. And what I also am present to today is like, it was just precious time. Like
Yeah.
we had so much time with our kids. And, I can't believe I'm now at an age where my kids are growing up and going away.
Hmm.
Um, and, you always hear it goes so fast, it goes so fast. Well, it does. And what was neat about that time is that it slowed way down and it was just us to a certain degree. And we had to figure out how to kind of survive together. And as you pointed out earlier, in some ways, we learned a ton from the kids. It was their opportunity to see us fail and flunder and make fools of ourselves, trying to talk Spanish and embarrass the heck out of them, and the courage to be learners and to do it together was just amazing. That's part of why I was excited to talk about this. Is I hope it may inspire more people to think about it or to do it. Or and as I said, the biggest thing I learned is just how resilient kids are, how amazingly there's just so much to learn from their courage and willingness to fail fast.
Yeah.
Especially when they're younger. Obviously, when they get into middle school and high school, the socialization and all that you can see the change. But at the age that the kids were, their willingness to kind of jump in, and then hearing what they've written about upon their reflection in their essays, just amazing.
Mm. You're also making me think about the courage of you and Melissa, like embarking on that journey too, and not knowing what was going to be happening. Because I remember traveling as a kid with my parents and like getting lost, and me being really judgmental of my parents. I just remember I was like, how could you get us lost? And my dad's like, I don't know where we are. Like, I'm like you. Why do you think I know more?
Yes.
And that was a real moment of like, oh wow, like my parents, I mean, not that I thought my parents knew everything, but there
Yep.
is that certain amount of they're doing their best.
Yes.
And I think that it gives you a little bit of humility and understanding of your parents at the same time, because you're on that journey together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so well said, because the sort of freedom that comes in being human, and especially as a parent, you feel the responsibility, and the kids are looking to you to have the answers. And we went on one trip, and part of the adventure was that we got to do all this traveling when we were in Europe, which is magical. Well, we flew into somewhere in Spain, and I done the homework. I rented a car, and I followed the instructions of the rental cars, and I'm like, there's not this pillar that they're telling me to go to. And then I looked more closely, and I called the help number for the rental car, and they said it's not open right now. And I'm like, what's going on? And then I was like, oh my God, I think I rented a car in Santiago, Chile, because we were in Santiago of Spain.
Oh my God.
And the kids are like, you did what? And I was like, yeah, I kind of messed that one up. And they're like, what are we going to do now? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, we're not going to have a rental car here in Santiago, Spain, because we've got one in Chile, but we can't get from here to Chile fast enough to get the car. So we're going to have to figure it out. Right. And,
It's an amazing story.
yeah. Right. Like, duh. And so we still laugh about that today, of just like, the silly things that we did and survived by way of putting ourselves in really unfamiliar and uncomfortable terrain.
Oh, that's so good. Thank you for sharing that. Any regrets?
Um, the only regret that I guess I would have is that we didn't say we were going for longer to start. Like the fact that we told the kids we're going for a year, we promise it's only a year. And then we changed the rules on them because we stayed longer. I wish I would have had the courage to say we're going for 2 years right out of the gate, if I could do it all over again. Because the first year, just goes in a blink of an eye, and you're just so upside down, confused, and sort of figuring it all out. And there's so much work to get ourselves there. So that's kind of how we explained the decision to stay. Was often in our world we talk about ROI, return on investment. Well, I said ROE, which is return on the effort. Like, let's get some return on all of the hard work we put in to get ourselves here, to learn the language, to adopt to the culture, to find our way around. so that we can actually like have some fun too, because we
Yeah.
worked our what's off to adapt. And just when we were starting to kind of figure it out and feel like we had a sense of ourselves, it would have been time to go if we hadn't decided to stay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Got it. Well, and you're also making me think about faith, like the idea of
Mm-hmm.
there's a certain amount of faith and hope and optimism that goes into these decisions. And I mean, I moved to New York. I'd obviously been to New York, but the person I was supposed to live with at the time lost her job, and she was leaving New York, and I didn't have money to go back to New York to find an apartment. So she looked at an apartment that I never saw, and she met the roommate that I ended up living with that I'd never met in person.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I remember I was like, how the hell am I going to tell my parents I'm doing this? And they were like, it's probably going to be the best roommate you've ever had. And like, we trust you. And
Mm-hmm.
that was amazing. When they said that to me, I'm like, okay, good. I'm making this decision. They're behind it.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful experience. So,
Yep.
but you never quite know, but there has to be a certain amount of faith. And I think you have to do a gut check with certain people. And I'm very grateful and lucky that I have parents that empower and trust me. And I'm
Yeah.
assuming that there's also a certain amount of that you were going through with each other, you and Melissa, and just you with the family too, as far as how do you anchor on faith and not craziness? Like you were
Right.
also saying, it could be a little
Ex-
cockamamie.
exactly. Exactly. Well, one of the things I thought I would share as it relates to this, and maybe it's not so much faith, but the thing that has really informed a large part of my life was a narrative story that I heard, and maybe you've heard about it, but it's called Run to the Roar. And it's a methodical story about, you're nodding your head, and so it sounds
Mhm.
like you know it, right? But essentially, the punchline, right, is to go towards what is fearful for you. And some of that requires faith, right? That even though it's scary over there, I'm going to point myself and go towards it.
Yeah.
And I think when I'm coaching, when I'm trying to live my life, when I'm talking to my kids, I'm actually now really, and why I was so excited to meet you and hear about your podcast, is this concept of courage. Is, to me, it's not, courage is about not the absence of fear. It's the fear is there, but I've got to work my way through it, or I've got to go towards it, or I've got to have faith or belief that I'll be okay even in the face of fear. And to me, that that whole exercise was, basically a 3-year journey of running towards the roar of everything that scared me. I kept sort of going, that's the direction we should keep going in. The decision to go, the decision to go to this town that we don't know anything about, the decision to get there and put our kids in the public schools, the decision to stay another year was just as equally scary. Of like, is this crazy? And if we stay another year, does that mean we're staying for good, kind of thing? And so
Yeah.
anyway, the point is that I try in my life today to keep turning towards the roar, and trusting myself and those that are around me or those that I'm working with, that I'll be okay. And you're right, faith has a big part of it, but faith also comes from the feeling of support and love around you, as you mentioned about your parents, right? When they're like, we trust you. That gives you then confidence to rely on yourself instead of relying on them.
Yeah. Well, and I think what a gift that you gave your kids. I mean, yes, a challenge.
Yeah.
Numerous challenges to your
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
but they stepped up, right? And they definitely rose to the occasion. So a difficult experience, but also a really wonderful one at the same time.
It is really fun to see how confidently our kids go off into the world because of that felt experience, that they did it. As I said, hey, you walked into that school and you came out the other side. And anything that you're afraid of, if you think about it, probably isn't as big and hard as that moment was that you did. And so my dad always used to say, look at the track record, George, look at the track record. And so now I think the kids have a track record of facing their fear, going through it, and coming out the other side with a sense of like, yeah, I can do that. It's not easy. It's still scary, but I'm willing to give it a shot. And I think that is courage.
Yeah. And having the trust and the belief in your kids that like they'll figure it out, right?
Yeah.
Like my parents with me. That's a beautiful thing, because you are giving somebody strength instead of just protecting them.
Yeah. Yeah. And boy, that's hard. I'm facing it again just now at this phase where they're launching, they're off to college, and that it's the letting go and trusting that they got what they need to make it through.
Yeah. There's always going to be new opportunities for that.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Well, thank you for a great conversation. It's wonderful to hear more about your experience, and I love the whole idea of like paying it forward, right? Like continuing to encourage people. Like I say, the show is about spreading courageous contagion,
Yes.
which is very much about the courageous contagion of travel or getting out of your comfort zone or living in a new culture or a new place. Any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Well, I do love that idea of contagion, and I would just say, to anyone that happens to be listening, that's like, ooh, like, do it. Like, your kids can do it, like you can do it, and the adventure is there waiting for you. Embrace it and see what happens. So my hope is that people feel inspired to take a risk and be courageous and do it as a family unit. It's precious. So
it is precious.
That's my hope.
I love that. Thank you. And by the time this airs, who knows where, maybe we'll be living in totally different places because we've taken your advice.
I was just going to say, there might be a lot of people thinking about going somewhere else right now. I don't know. I mean, just maybe, but.
Which is why I was having that conversation last night. A lot of people are like, okay, what other countries can I live in?
Yeah, so, I was just going to say, it might be, this might not be such a novel thing anytime soon. So
yeah, I think the timing of it is perfect. So George, thank you for a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. So much appreciated. And thank you for also encouraging me to step into a little bit outside my comfort zone by doing this with you. So I appreciate the invitation and the challenge in that.
You are very welcome. I'm very happy that you mustered your courage to be on the show. So thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Stay courageous. The Courage Effect is brought to you by Weller Collaboration. If you're looking for a leadership coach, maybe a speaker or a consultant to help you or your team be more courageous and adaptable, we would love to have a conversation. More information is available via the links in our show notes. Please spread the word about the Courage Effect. You taking a few minutes to rate or review your favorite episodes or share them with people in your universe makes a big difference. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. For more information about the show, me, our amazing guests, or you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, please contact us via our website at thecourageeffect.com. It takes a village to bring this show to you. I want to thank Alex Nandyforth for her production and administrative superpowers, Dave Nelson for composing our theme music, and I am your host and sometimes producer, Suzanne Weller. Thank you again for listening.